Now, the Great Resignation in the U.S. has reached South African shores. All mutual-found South African companies are recording higher resignation rates than before the pandemic. It's driving an exodus of skilled professionals. One of the reasons is that employees want a better work-life balance. Employment lawyer Jacqui Reed speaks to us now. Jacqui, good morning, and thank you very much for your time. I know it seems to be a better work balance that they're looking for, but what other reasons could they attribute this exodus of skilled professionals to?
Morning, thank you for having me. My understanding of the surveys that have been done recently and over the past couple of years in relation to employees resigning is related to a number of issues. The first issue is pay, obviously. The second issue, and more importantly, according to these surveys, are the societal issues that are raised in the workplace, as well as issues relating to general well-being and happiness. So if an employee feels like they're part of a team, they're included, their managers consider their personal circumstances, both from a personal perspective as well as a work perspective. Remote working is dealt with in a certain way versus, the hybrid working model versus working at the office, working at home. Remember, we've got employees in the workplace who cannot actually work from home. They have to work in the office. And what has been found in these surveys is that those employees are actually feeling quite disempowered and not very fulfilled in their jobs because they don't have this opportunity to work in a hybrid model. One of the things that's very important for employees is feeling fulfilled at work and feeling like they can be themselves at work. So what these surveys have indicated is essentially changes need to come from leadership, and the leadership needs to ensure that they approach these more human resources and industrial relations type issues in a different way, and with empathy and with consideration for their employees as human beings who not only come to the workplace but also have families and friends and things like that they in their lives. Mental well-being is a massive issue, of course, as we come out of this pandemic. And that is something that a lot of employees have identified as being important, that they get the necessary support and assistance in circumstances where their mental health and or their physical health is suffering for whatever reason. Also, issues relating to discrimination, diversity and inclusion in the workplace, these are also very important issues. And of course, as we've seen recently, and it's the big buzzword at the moment, is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And what a lot of employees are saying is that they want their employers to have an impact on society. So they must uplift those members of society that are in a less favorable position, and they must also ensure that the climate is something that's top of mind with a lot of organizations. So they want to see real change. They don't want employers to pay lip service to change. They want to see it, they want to feel it, and they want to be a part of it.
For those managers that are watching our interview now, how do they strike that balance to attempt to meet the expectations of the employee but also meet the objectives of the company? Because in some instances you find that, yes, we've seen a lot of people working in this hybrid model, but in some companies it's absolutely impossible. They need to have everybody in the same space, in a boardroom if that is the case, and it just doesn't work for them. So how does a manager balance the expectations of the employee versus the objectives of the company?
So what's interesting is that a lot of these, there's been a lot of pushback in relation to a lot of these issues that arise from managers and from leaders in workplaces. They assume that, for example, an issue like discrimination or religion or politics, that these issues are too divisive, they create problems in the workplace, they are something to be avoided. And in fact, what the PwC survey found, and I recall that you had a gentleman on from PwC discussing the survey, is that survey found that in fact having these types of discussions creates a more positive workplace for people, and they're actually not divisive. They bring people together. They ensure that people discuss issues that otherwise they wouldn't feel free to discuss. There's no judgment, and they feel more valued and they feel more included in the workplace. And the same applies to issues relating to the hybrid working model. There are actually quite a lot of employees that want to continue to work remotely. And those employees will have to, on some occasions, come into the office because that's what's required in order to ensure that there's a corporate culture, in order to ensure that there's collaboration, there's teamwork, there's a sense of energy, there's a sense of belonging to the workplace. And then, of course, there are those employees who have to come to the workplace. And those employees who have to come to the workplace, I think we have to have a discussion with them, and we need to say to them, you're an essential part of the workplace, and make it a positive discussion, not a negative one. To say, we really need you here. We actually can't, unfortunately, accommodate you in a remote manner because you're an essential part of the workplace. So you make them feel empowered and you make them feel wanted. And these are psychological issues that need to be dealt with, and possibly training needs to be provided to these managers in order to assist with these kinds of discussions. The other thing that's important is to maybe discuss with these employees upskilling them and training them and saying, well, at this point, your skills and qualifications are such that you can't work remotely. You have to work in the office. But perhaps let's discuss, what are your career aspirations? What do you want to be in the future, perhaps? What do you want to look at studying, for example? And these are things that you can try and assist your employees with, and perhaps have programs where you provide employees with a certain amount of financial assistance for studying and so on. So you empower them, and those kinds of things create a positive workplace. I know for myself, for example, last year during the July unrest, we're an international firm, and we had colleagues from all over the world emailing us, phoning us, saying, how are you guys doing? Is there anything we can do to help? This is what we're doing to help. And those kinds of things, making you feel part of a bigger organization, are the things that really matter. Mm-hmm. And also what's very important for employees is to be proud of the organization they work for. And in fact, those emails and telephone calls that we all received from our colleagues overseas certainly made me feel proud to be an employee of this firm, because I felt that there was care, there was empathy, there was concern. We were considered human beings, not just lawyers who charge billable hours. And I think that that's what's really important, is that you have this empathy and you have all these conversations all the time with your employees.
Mm-hmm. Jacqui, just in closing, we've seen that mental health has seriously become a priority for many, particularly young professionals. They're not willing to compromise this aspect in any working environment. What about the lockdown at the height of the COVID pandemic had created that shift? Because we saw many, even on social media, if a job is toxic, rather, they walk away. Whatever the plan is, you have a lot of young people that have decided that mental health has now become too much of a priority. So what was it about the lockdown that led to this shift?
Absolutely. So obviously the lockdown, I think for a lot of employees, created a sense of isolation and a sense that they're not part of a team. And that would particularly affect the younger workers in the workplace, because it's quite important, and I found this when I was a youngster, to have constant interaction with those in more senior positions, because you often learn by way essentially of osmosis. You sit there and you listen to your superior addressing a client or whatever it is, and you learn how to do it through them. You don't necessarily learn as well when you're behind a computer screen, because even though we can have Teams meetings and we can all have our cameras on and everything, there are other aspects of it, such as, body language and things like that can become difficult to ascertain in those kinds of environments. So I think that's why employees decided that was very important to them. And I think that's where the hybrid working model is going to come in. I think this decision that everyone must work remotely is probably not going to work for the younger employees. And again, things like diversity and inclusion are particularly important amongst the youth. Issues around discrimination, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, of course, gender pay has been a huge issue for a long time. The LGBTQ community, discussions around that is very important. So I would say to employers, as a takeaway, create these committees, diversity and inclusion committees, create a mental health committee where you make sure that people check in with your employees from time to time, create opportunities for training, create opportunities for people to upskill themselves. And I was having a discussion with one of the partners in the firm about about this particular issue and about whether or not it's something that we should look at as a firm. And what was interesting was that he talked about the fact that employees that leave an organization, they leave an organization not because they're presented with an opportunity necessarily. Of course, you have people that are headhunted, but generally it's them looking for the opportunity. And the question is, why are they looking for the opportunity? They're looking for the opportunity because they're not 100% fulfilled. And I think what's very important is for employers to look at their employees, particularly those with scarce skills, those who can demand higher pay and so on, and look at the soft skill issues and try and assist those employees and change the workplace in order to accommodate those people so that they don't leave. Because also the costs of employees leaving your organization in large numbers is significant. I think the PwC survey said it's something like 48 billion rand a year that employers suffer as a result of employees leaving, because then you have to recruit more people. Time of managers comes into play, where they have to interview new people. You have to make sure that those people also don't have problems with previous employers or anything like that, so all the background checks and everything. And then, of course, and as I discussed in an article on the Code of Harassment, is that when you're recruiting employees, you've got to make sure that they understand about harassment and bullying in the workplace, which is what creates a toxic workplace. So you don't want to bring in employees who can create a toxic workplace. So there are a number of issues that you need to look at. And it's better to keep your employees on that you've invested time and money in than constantly recruiting. So it's definitely something that employers need to look at. And as we've seen, particularly in the US, I think the US has got a staggering number of people that have resigned in the last couple of years, something like 40 or 50%. Mm-hmm. And I think that it comes down to flexibility, autonomy, respect by your managers, the way they treat you, the way they speak to you, the way they consider your circumstances. All of those things have become important because the pandemic has made people realize what's important. And I think that the softer issues are more important now.
Mm-hmm. Jacqui, thank you very much for your insights. That was employment lawyer Jacqui Reed.